My name is Elizabeth, and I'm a 45-year-old single mom from New York. I've raised my son Lucas on my own since he was a kid. He's now 23, and we're incredibly close. One chilly winter night, Lucas came home exhausted from work and school. He looked worn out, so I suggested he rest in my bed for a while. As I lay next to him, I felt him snuggle closer, trying to get warm. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me gently, just like he used to when he was younger. At first, it felt normal, just a mom comforting her son. But as we lay there, I started to feel a strange, unsettling tension. The room was quiet, except for the sound of my own heartbeat. Lucas's breathing slowed, and I thought he was falling asleep. But then he shifted closer, his arm wrapping tighter around me. I froze, unsure what to think. Part of me wanted to pull away, but another part stayed still. That's when I felt something unexpected, a hardness under the blanket. My heart started racing as I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that Lucas was just my son. Maybe he didn't even realize it himself. As the minutes passed, the tension between us grew. Lucas stayed close, his breathing steady, but I could feel the warmth building. I wanted to say something, to break the silence, but the words wouldn't come. Lucas shifted, lifting his head to look at me. His eyes were soft, making me feel both safe and nervous. He didn't say anything, but his gaze seemed to ask if everything was okay. I tried to smile, but it only made the silence feel deeper. Lucas's hand stayed on my arm, warm and soft. His fingertips moved gently, sparking something inside me that I couldn't ignore. I kept my breathing steady, trying not to let him see that my heart was racing. As we lay there, I told myself this was just a mother comforting her son. But in that quiet moment, with just the two of us under the blanket, my mind kept spinning with thoughts that felt wrong, yet impossible to push away. Lucas didn't seem to notice my struggle. He just stayed beside me, his hand moving softly, comforting. His breathing was calm, his eyes closed again. I wondered if he was falling asleep, but then his hand shifted, moving slowly up my arm. I felt a chill run through me, and he opened his eyes, looking right into mine. There was a question in his gaze, as if he was asking if this was okay, if he felt the same strange pull that I did. I whispered his name, my voice barely audible. I wanted to stop this, to pull away and create some distance, but I couldn't move. The tension between us was too strong, like a quiet storm building in the silence. Neither of us spoke, but the air was filled with unspoken words, things we both felt but couldn't bring ourselves to say. Then, as if it was the most natural thing, Lucas leaned in closer. My heart pounded, my mind racing, but I couldn't bring myself to pull back. I felt torn, caught between my role as his mother and the strange feelings that had surfaced. As Lucas leaned closer, I felt my breath catch and every thought faded away, leaving only that moment between us. Lucas's hand rested gently on my shoulder, his fingers lingering as if he too was hesitating. The world around us felt distant, and all I could focus on was the warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. For a moment I closed my eyes, trying to calm myself. I told myself to back away, to break the closeness that felt so confusing and overwhelming. But then I felt Lucas's hand gently move up, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. It was such a simple, caring gesture, and yet it made my heart ache in ways I couldn't understand. I opened my eyes, and there he was, looking at me with such softness, such trust. His face was so close and I could see every small detail, the tiny freckles, the gentle curve of his mouth, the way his eyes searched mine. There was a vulnerability in his gaze that matched my own, and I could see that he was just as lost in this moment as I was. We stayed like that, suspended in the quiet, as if time itself had stopped. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and things I couldn't make sense of, but my body wouldn't move. I felt drawn to him, this person I had raised, and yet he felt like someone entirely new to me in that moment. Just as I thought we'd stay frozen in that silence forever, Lucas pulled back, slightly breaking the trance. He looked away, almost embarrassed, and let out a shaky laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. It brought me back to reality, making me realize just how close we'd been. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of emotions inside me, hoping he hadn't noticed. "Sorry, Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I didn't mean to do justice to the weirdness I caused." He avoided my gaze, and I could see a hint of color on his cheeks, like he was struggling with the same confusion I was. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him that everything was okay, but the words got stuck in my throat. I didn't know what to say, and for the first time in a long while, I felt awkward around my own son. I reached out, putting my hand on his shoulder, and gave him a small smile, hoping it would ease the tension. "It's all right, Lucas," I said, my voice soft and steady. It's just been us for so long. We're both probably just feeling a little lost." Lucas nodded, and I could see a flash of relief in his eyes. Then, just as the tension started to fade, the doorbell rang. The sudden noise jolted us both back to the present, breaking whatever spell had been between us. I quickly got up, feeling my heart still racing, and headed to the door, grateful for the interruption. When I opened it, I found our neighbor, Mark, standing there. Mark had always been friendly, someone I could count on when I needed help. He smiled, but his eyes lingered on me a bit longer than usual, and I realized I still had that strange energy from the moment with Lucas. I felt a strange wave of relief wash over me, and for a moment, I let myself relax. "Oh, thank you, Mark," I replied, smiling. "Actually, the house does get a bit chilly. I'd really appreciate it if you could do justice to fixing the heater." Mark stepped inside, and I could feel Lucas watching us from the hallway, his face unreadable. I glanced back at him, and for a second, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something like jealousy, though he tried to hide it quickly. It surprised me, leaving me wondering if he was feeling more than he wanted to admit. Mark moved around, checking the heater, asking me questions about how things were at home. We made small talk, but he kept glancing at Lucas, who stayed quiet, watching us both with a strange intensity. I could sense his discomfort, and it added a new layer of tension, so I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and replayed everything that had happened. I couldn't ignore it forever, but I also wasn't sure how to face it. Just then, I heard a soft knock at my door. My heart jumped a little, wondering if Lucas had come back. "Come in," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Lucas opened the door and stepped inside. His face was unreadable. He came over and sat next to me, looking down at his hands. We sat there in silence for a moment, the air heavy with everything unsaid. "Mom?" he finally began, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry if I made things strange earlier. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with his words. I placed my hand on his, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Lucas, it's okay. Maybe we're both feeling a little lost right now. It's been just us for so long, and sometimes things can get confusing." He nodded, his gaze still on his hands. Then he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite read. "It feels different," he said softly, almost as if he was afraid to admit it. I didn't know how to respond. I felt my own heart ache with that same confusion. For a moment I thought about reaching out to hug him, to tell him everything would be fine, but I wasn't sure if it was what he needed or if it would make things even more complicated, so instead I just sat there, letting the silence speak for both of us. Finally, I took a deep breath and looked into his eyes. "Lucas, maybe we just need to take a step back and think about everything," I said gently. "It's okay to feel close, but it's also okay to need space, to figure things out." He nodded slowly. Then, in a surprising move, he leaned his head on my shoulder, just like he used to when he was younger. It felt comforting, familiar, yet with that strange edge to it that I couldn't ignore. I felt my heart soften, and I put my arm around him, pulling him close in a way that felt safe, even though I knew the questions between us weren't fully answered. For the first time in a while, I felt that maybe we didn't have to have all the answers right now. We could take it one step at a time, figuring things out together even if it was complicated. As we sat there, just holding on to each other, I felt a sense of calm, a quiet hope that no matter what, we would find our way through this, together. We stayed like that, sitting quietly together, as if all the confusion between us could disappear just by being close. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The warmth between us was comforting, yet unsettling, like a feeling just beneath the surface that neither of us could ignore. After a while, Lucas pulled back, looking at me with a mix of emotions still in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said again, his voice soft. I smiled, trying to reassure him. "It's okay, Lucas. We'll figure this out together."